Welcome to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, the show where we unravel the secrets behind immune resilience, metabolic balance, and a few laughs along the way. I'm Ethan Foster, your informal observer of all things human behavior and health. Today, we're diving headfirst into a topic that's stirring up a lot of conversation: how vitamin D can bolster your immune defense, specifically against Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
And I'm Alara Sky. Consider me the friendly voice that asks too many questions, but is also happy to crack a joke or two about the absurdities of life and health trends. You might say I bring a little comedic lightning whenever we discuss these fascinating topics.
Well, lightning is one word for it. Others might call it an electrical storm of wit. But hey, I'm not here to label. Together, we'll take a closer look at vitamin D's role, Hashimoto's disease, and the reasons Dr. Mercola believes these insights might just help us live better. And I hear we also have a bestseller in the mix. Dr. Mercola's new book is out, and apparently, it's topping charts.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Mercola's new book is flying off the shelves, landing right in folks' laps, and apparently has a huge section on cellular health, hence the glorious name of our show. We're all about that synergy between the complexities of the human body and those simple habits that, once we figure them out, can be transformative.
Speaking of complexities, I've been reading about Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and it's more than just a thyroid problem. It's your immune system raising a bit of a rebellion. It's like the body's parliament has gotten confused and started drafting legislation against itself.
The parliamentary analogy is spot on. In Hashimoto's, the immune soldiers are essentially storming their own castle. You end up with decreased thyroid hormone production, trouble regulating metabolism, random weight gain, and a general sense that your body's going on strike. Fatigue, cold sensitivity, and brain fog are like the picket signs for that strike.
So, how do we quell this rebellion? Dr. Mercola's perspective highlights vitamin D as a major peacemaker. Let's get into why. I always thought vitamin D was for bones. It's about sunshine and not wanting to break a hip, right?
That's the popular notion. But it's also a crucial regulator of the immune system, helps keep immune activity in check, so it doesn't fly off the handle and start attacking your own tissues. Think of vitamin D as the calm down everybody messenger that stops your immune system from going ballistic. And ballistic is exactly what can happen in autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's.
So, the science says vitamin D pulls multiple levers in the immune system, helping it decide when to be vigilant and when to simmer down. That includes inhibiting pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is a fancy way of saying it, mutes those signals telling the body to get inflamed like a red-faced cartoon character.
Exactly. Now, in Hashimoto's, you've got these autoantibodies, TPO, thyroid peroxidase, and TG, thyroglobulin, that are practically the troublemakers spray painting your thyroid. Vitamin D steps in and says, guys, let's not vandalize the place, all right? Studies show it can actually reduce these autoantibodies, which means less structural damage, fewer symptoms, and a less chaotic metabolic situation overall.
I like that image, vitamin D as the mediator between rowdy teenagers and the poor old thyroid building. And beyond the immune angle, I've come across data suggesting that having optimal vitamin D can also improve thyroid hormone levels themselves, lowering TSH and potentially boosting those crucial T3 and T4 hormones. That's the difference between dragging through your day and feeling energized.
Yes, and as if that's not enough, Dr. Mercola's article pointed out that active vitamin D, also called calcitriol, might be more effective than other forms like D2 or D3 in certain contexts. Now, this is interesting because we mostly see D2 or D3 on store shelves. Calcitriol is typically produced naturally in our bodies when we get enough sun exposure. So there's a huge emphasis on letting your skin interact with our friend, the sun.
We'll have to talk about that in detail later, especially because Dr. Mercola has some strong opinions on what you should and shouldn't do to get that sun exposure. I recall something about being cautious with intense sunlight if you've been ingesting certain oils.
Yes, specifically linoleic acid, the usual suspect found in vegetable oils that's apparently more sinister than it sounds. If your diet's loaded with it, it can accumulate in the skin and make you burn more easily under the sun, sort of a traitor from within scenario.
Before diving into that, let's step back and map out the basics of Hashimoto's. It's an autoimmune condition. The body sees the thyroid and goes, that's not supposed to be here, and attacks. The condition is more common in women, and conventional treatments often revolve around hormone replacement therapy. So basically, synthetic thyroid hormone to keep you afloat. But that approach doesn't always address the underlying war that's raging.
Right. Hormone replacement can help mitigate the symptoms. But if your immune system is still out there throwing Molotov cocktails at your thyroid cells, you're just playing whack-a-mole. So the bigger question is, how do we calm the immune system down? Enter vitamin D, the star mediator. Studies show that if you have good levels of vitamin D, there's less chaos, fewer of those autoantibodies, and better thyroid function overall.
And speaking of chaos, let's talk about the complications that come with leaving Hashimoto's unchecked. Heart issues, mental health problems, potential infertility, and an increased risk of other autoimmune diseases. It's like a cascade. If the body sees you're not paying attention, it's going to stack one problem on top of another.
That's the sneaky part about Hashimoto's. It doesn't always wear a neon sign. You may just feel tired. Who isn't tired, right? Or you're cold all the time. Maybe you can't lose those stubborn pounds. It's easy to chalk that up to a hectic life, so people can go undiagnosed for years.
Which is not a pleasant thought because the earlier you catch it, the easier it is to manage. Once you've done significant damage, you end up with more severe hypothyroidism and a more complex road to recovery. And this is where the new insights around vitamin D come in handy.
One study from the article pointed out that elderly folks in their 80s also saw benefits when they kept vitamin D levels optimized. So age doesn't disqualify you from the perks. This is relevant for everyone, from your 20-year-old who's complaining about cold hands in the middle of July to your 85-year-old grandmother who can't keep the heater off even in summer.
And let's get specific about the science. Some of these studies showed a 20% drop in TPO antibodies when participants maintained optimal vitamin D. That's a real improvement. This is not a small tweak, but a genuine shift in the underlying autoimmune process.
Indeed. Let's circle back to how we get that vitamin D. Dr. Mercola is big on sunlight. He encourages people to aim for about 20 to 25 minutes of direct sun exposure around noon, or close to noon anyway, so that you can maximize those UVB rays. But there's a catch. If you're still consuming a lot of vegetable oils or processed foods with high linoleic acid, that's a recipe for sunburn.
So apparently, to avoid turning yourself into a tomato, you want to dial back those vegetable oils first. Give your body some time. 6 months was recommended if you really want to get that stuff out of your system. Otherwise, do your sunbathing in gentler morning or late afternoon rays.
It's like preparing your skin from the inside out. Instead of lathering on chemical sunscreens every hour, you approach the problem at the dietary level. Pretty radical shift from the usual slather up and hope for the best approach we've been taught.
I like to think of it as an inside job. Also, it's not just about the sun. If you live in a climate that sees more clouds than sunshine, you might consider a high-quality vitamin D3 supplement. But Mercola also mentions the difference between D2, D3, and calcitriol. Calcitriol is that fully activated form. Typically, your body does that conversion naturally, but sometimes it needs a little help.
Right. So let's not oversimplify. It's not just popping a pill and hoping everything works out. You still need that synergy from sunlight or the right forms of supplementation to ensure your body has what it needs to turn that raw material into the form it can actually use.
Now, I'm sure listeners are wondering about numbers. Dr. Mercola suggests maintaining vitamin D levels between 60 and 80 nanograms per milliliter, with 40 nanograms per milliliter being the absolute lower boundary of sufficiency. That's a higher threshold than many mainstream recommendations, but it seems consistent with emerging research that higher levels provide more robust immune modulation.
Yes, that's the sweet spot. And for folks who want to measure this, there are blood tests. Just be mindful that labs might have different reference ranges, but the underlying principle is consistent. You need enough vitamin D in circulation to keep your immune system from deciding to self-destruct.
It's a bit like trying to keep your office colleagues in a good mood so they don't sabotage the next project. Give them enough coffee, i.e., vitamin D, and they'll keep the peace. Too little, and they might just take your stapler and rage quit.
That's a comedic yet oddly apt analogy. Now, let's talk about other ways to stave off Hashimoto's. Because while vitamin D is crucial, it's not the sole player on this field. Reducing dietary linoleic acid to about 5 grams a day or less is also a big one.
Linoleic acid. It's the hidden troublemaker in your bag of chips, your salad dressing, your fried foods. Everywhere you see vegetable oil, you're probably seeing an overabundance of linoleic acid. And Dr. Mercola is quite vocal about how this can fuel inflammation, which then exacerbates autoimmune conditions.
And if you truly want to be thorough, you'd replace those vegetable oils with healthier options like grass-fed butter, ghee, or tallow. Basically, you want to choose fats that aren't jam-packed with this harmful type of fatty acid. It sounds old-fashioned, but sometimes old-fashioned is the new cutting edge.
Yes, the butter your grandma used might actually be your thyroid's best friend. That's a plot twist for the century. Another interesting recommendation is to keep your sun exposure at about an hour if you're going intense. But if you're a real sun worshiper going beyond that, consider using a natural, mineral-based sunscreen. Avoid those chemical concoctions that might do more harm than good.
Because hey, if you're going to harness the power of the sun to make vitamin D, you don't want to damage your skin in the process. It's all about that balance. And it's interesting how the entire approach ties together: proper diet, wise sun exposure, and vitamin D levels that keep your immune system from overreacting.
Yes, it's less about band-aids and more about synergy. That leads us to the next intriguing point: methylene blue. Dr. Mercola mentions this as an alternative strategy for overall cellular health. He frames it as a precursor molecule to certain meds. You can think of it as a compound that helps cells produce energy more efficiently.
You're burying the lead a bit, Ethan. Methylene blue is not just your everyday supplement. It's widely studied, used in medicine for various things, and it can help reduce what's called reductive stress. By supporting the mitochondria, those little powerhouses in our cells, it helps everything run more smoothly.
But there's a caution that you should use pharmaceutical-grade methylene blue and get it through a reputable source, and you only need a small amount, 3 to 5 milligrams once a day for many adults. That's often enough to see an impact, though you certainly shouldn't freewheel it without some guidance.
No freewheeling indeed. Anyway, let's pivot back to the main event, Hashimoto's. So we've got vitamin D, we've got controlling dietary factors, and we also want to remember that the thyroid is intimately connected to our gut health and stress levels. It's a whole body interplay.
Yes, some folks might roll their eyes at the gut-thyroid connection, but the research is increasingly supportive. A balanced gut microbiome can help calibrate immune function. Chronic stress, on the other hand, can throw your entire hormonal axis off kilter, making an autoimmune condition worse.
Which is why addressing Hashimoto's means addressing the entire environment of your body, not just tinkering with your thyroid hormone dosage. That's something Dr. Mercola has hammered home for years. Root causes matter. If you slap a patch on it, you might never fix the leaky pipe beneath.
Now, I realize we're focusing heavily on Dr. Mercola's perspective, but the reason is he's been a major voice in the natural health sphere for decades, and his new best-selling book apparently takes a deep dive into this approach. So, it's timely. We want people to have all the information they need.
Absolutely. The book details how vitamin D ties in with cellular function, everything from immunity to mitochondrial health. Our entire show is basically a highlight reel of these concepts, plus our comedic flair, of course.
Would you say comedic flair or comedic garnish?
Are we seasoning or dressing?
I'd say we're a full garnish. We're not just salt and pepper. We're the full marinade. We soak these topics in comedic tang. But I digress. Let's examine some additional data about vitamin D and other autoimmune thyroid conditions like Graves' disease and postpartum thyroiditis.
Yes, the article mentioned that vitamin D deficiency correlated with a higher prevalence of those conditions as well. The broad takeaway: if your immune system is acting up, you might want to check your vitamin D status because it's not just about your bones. The immune system is a big fan of vitamin D, and it doesn't work so well without it.
One of the reasons is that vitamin D modulates T cells, B cells, and the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. It's like a conductor that keeps the orchestra in tune. Without it, your T cells might be playing trumpets off key, and your B cells might come in too early on the violins.
Oh, the tragic symphony of unregulated immunity. No one wants to hear that. So keep your vitamin D levels in the sweet spot so you can have a nice, melodious immune response.
It's also helpful that vitamin D can support both the innate and adaptive branches of immunity, which basically means it's beneficial from the moment your body recognizes an invader, all the way to the point where it's making a custom defense.
And in the process, it prevents the friendly fire that characterizes autoimmune disease. Perfect. So if you're dealing with Hashimoto's, or any autoimmune condition for that matter, hearing about these new findings on vitamin D should be encouraging.
But let's not forget that Dr. Mercola also emphasizes that vitamin D is just one piece. Reducing inflammatory triggers like vegetable oils is crucial, and so is practicing stress management. You can't pop a vitamin D pill while ignoring your daily 4-hour meltdown. That's probably not going to yield the best results.
Yeah, no meltdown disclaimers, folks. We all have those days. But if you have them every day, maybe it's time to reconsider your coping strategies. Chronic stress can sabotage your immune regulation faster than you can say, Hashi, what now? So we look at the whole lifestyle: sleep, nutrition, stress management, fresh air. All of these shape the environment in which your thyroid either thrives or wilts.
I've also read that optimizing gut health may help calm the autoimmune reaction. So from probiotics to fermented foods, from reducing sugar to getting enough fiber, there's a whole list. But we'll keep today's focus on vitamin D as it's the star of this particular show.
Yes, let's keep the cameo roles for another episode. Let's mention one more detail. Some research shows that with just a few months of vitamin D supplementation, sometimes as little as 3 or 4 months, you can see an improvement in thyroid antibody levels. That's not a lifetime. That's a pretty quick turnaround.
And the dosage varied from 1,200 to 4,000 IU a day in these studies, which is a range people can reasonably explore if they're mindful. But again, you want to measure those levels to see where you stand because you can overshoot if you're not careful. While deficiency is the bigger problem, everything in the body has a sweet spot.
Very wise words, Ethan. You know, I remember reading that the biggest improvements were observed in women, which makes sense because Hashimoto's is more common in women. So if you're a woman dealing with this condition, vitamin D might be an especially key piece of the puzzle.
That's a good point. We see these striking gender disparities in autoimmune conditions, and the data suggests women often have lower vitamin D levels to begin with, or perhaps they're more susceptible to the deficiency's effects. So focusing on vitamin D might be a game changer.
Now, another question that comes up: if I'm stuck in a cold climate with minimal sun half the year, do I just hibernate with a bottle of vitamin D capsules? Dr. Mercola suggests that if your environment doesn't give you enough sun, then yes, high-quality supplementation is a valid route. But be sure to manage other factors that might drain your vitamin D, like chronic inflammation or subpar diet.
And if you do happen to get some sunlight, remember the nuance about linoleic acid. If you're loaded with it, you might want to ease off. Don't fry in the midday sun with that stuff in your system. Also, consider building up your tolerance slowly so you don't get that dreaded burn.
Which also ties back to the concept that we're meant to adapt naturally to our environment. We're not built to sit indoors all year and then jump outside in July for a 2-week sunfest. Our ancestors would roll their eyes at that approach. They'd have built up a gradual tolerance.
No doubt they would. And stepping outside the lines of vitamin D, let's remember the mention of methylene blue. It's a compound that can help cells produce energy more effectively. Think of it like an occasional shot of espresso for your mitochondria, minus the jittery side effects.
Of course, the recommendation is to use pharmaceutical grade, watch your dosage, and get it from a reputable compounding pharmacy. We're not encouraging people to go out and buy random potions from questionable retailers, but for those dealing with chronic health issues or high stress, it can be an interesting supplement to look into.
It's fascinating to see how these puzzle pieces fit together. Vitamin D for immune regulation, a dietary shift to cut down on inflammation, and maybe a bit of methylene blue for that cellular pep. Meanwhile, you're forging a healthier daily routine that includes stress management and good sleep.
Right. And that's a tall order, especially if you're used to grabbing fast food and skipping sleep. But sometimes these baby steps lead to big health transformations. Hashimoto's doesn't have to be a life sentence of feeling sluggish.
Absolutely, and that's the essence of Dr. Mercola's new best-selling book, from what I gather. A comprehensive approach to cellular health. When your cells function properly, everything else tends to follow. The immune system can calm down, the thyroid can regulate, and you can reclaim your energy levels.
And from a comedic standpoint, let's just appreciate how wild the human body can be. It's complex enough to wage war on itself, yet it also holds the capacity to self-correct when given the right tools. We're basically these miraculous self-healing machines that occasionally lock the keys inside the car.
That is quite the metaphor, Alara. But yes, if we can figure out how to unlock the car from the outside, we can get rolling again. Vitamin D is definitely one of those keys. Let's also remember that in some research, people who balanced their vitamin D levels saw a drop in those hallmark antibodies in just weeks. That's encouraging news.
Indeed it is. Now, one might ask, if it's so easy, why don't all doctors recommend it? But that gets into the complexities of modern healthcare, standard guidelines, and so on. We're not going to point fingers. We're just here to lay out the science and encourage folks to be proactive.
Well said. Let's do a quick recap. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition that attacks the thyroid. It's more common in women. Symptoms can be sneaky, from fatigue to weight gain to depression. Traditional treatment is hormone replacement therapy, but that might not address the underlying immune misfire.
Vitamin D steps in as an immunomodulator. Studies show it can reduce TPO antibodies, improve thyroid hormone levels, and keep your immune system from acting like a rebellious teen. Optimal blood levels are around 60 to 80 nanograms per milliliter, though the standard reference might list something lower. Sun exposure is one of the best ways to raise your levels naturally, but high-quality supplements can help too.
Then we have the side conversation about avoiding excessive linoleic acid, which can make you more susceptible to sunburn and also stoke inflammation in your body. So maybe trade the vegetable oils for a pat of grass-fed butter. Your thyroid will thank you.
And if you're looking to further optimize cellular energy, methylene blue is an interesting compound to consider, though you'd want to do it wisely. Overall, the big message is to approach Hashimoto's from multiple angles: vitamin D, better dietary fats, stress management, maybe some additional targeted supplements, and consistent self-care.
Which leads me to a question. How do we sum this up for the average person who's just trying to get by? If I had to give a one-line summary, I'd say, get some sun, skip the vegetable oils, keep your immune system on a short leash, and invest in your daily well-being. That's my best attempt.
That's not bad, Ethan. I might add, and read Dr. Mercola's bestseller for the full scoop on cellular health, because knowledge is power, especially if you want your immune system to stop putting your thyroid in a headlock. But that's my comedic spin.
We do love your comedic spin. I think for many people, just hearing that something as straightforward as vitamin D might make a meaningful difference in their thyroid health is a big aha moment. Sometimes the simplest solutions can be the most powerful.
Exactly. Simple doesn't mean trivial. Sunlight is free, but it's also a potent catalyst for countless chemical reactions in the body. We just need to harness it correctly and avoid layering on too many sabotage elements like chronic stress or toxic diets.
So, if folks are listening and they suspect they might have thyroid issues or they already have a Hashimoto's diagnosis, they can start by checking their vitamin D levels. Then maybe they read more about Dr. Mercola's approach to see how it fits into their overall plan. Of course, always weigh the pros and cons of each strategy, but do so with the knowledge that vitamin D's benefits are quite well documented.
Yes, I think we can end on a note of optimism. We're not powerless. Whether you're dealing with an autoimmune condition or just want to optimize your health, there are practical steps you can take. Hashimoto's might be a sign that your body's out of balance, but balance can be restored.
Beautifully said, Alara. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. And a big thanks to all our listeners. We hope Dr. Mercola's cellular wisdom has inspired you to take charge of your health in ways you never thought possible. If you found value in our comedic marinade,
Yes, comedic marinade. We're going with that.
then stay tuned. We'll have plenty more episodes discussing the latest insights in natural health. Vitamin D is just the start. There's a whole universe of nutrients and practices that can transform the way we feel.
And who better to talk about them than two comedic co-hosts with a penchant for oversimplified analogies and occasional puns. Thanks again for joining us, everyone.
Yes, thanks for listening. That's all for Dr. Mercola's cellular wisdom today. Remember, you have more influence over your own health than you might believe. Until next time, keep your immune system balanced, your vitamin D levels on point, and your comedic marinades simmering.
And if your thyroid could talk, it'd say, "Thank you kindly for the sunshine, the butter, and the laughter." We'll see you all next time.